My name is Aaron Johnson, and I run a neuroimmunology laboratory in the Department of Immunology at the Mayo Clinic. And what I love about my job is the freedom to kind of explore new areas, the freedom to teach the next generation of researchers, as well as the freedom to do academic research on basic science questions. And the things that drive me to get up in the morning is basically to look for the things that are unknown at the same time while pursuing ideas that I had individually. At the same time, I also enjoy the colleagues that I have at the Mayo Clinic, and we have a lot of good neuroscientists as well as immunologists who work together to have a very strong neurology department. And between the different laboratories being specialized, we can create nice multidisciplinary projects to combat diseases such as multiple sclerosis, brain cancers, as well as brain infections. This conference has a special place in my heart actually because it was the first conference I attended as a student. And so when I first was getting started in the work, this was the first opportunity to have platform talks to speak to larger audiences who weren't a part of my institution. And so over the years, we've always made an effort to attend this conference. And as a student, I moved to be a postdoc. And then after a postdoc, I became a PI. As a PI, we had a small laboratory, but we also had my first graduate students who now come back now to give talks at this particular conference. And so this morning, I had my most recent student give a talk at AAI. And so it's kind of see the cycle complete itself after 20 years of having a relationship with this meeting. So we had multiple students now, and they've all been very good students. And some were more polished up front, and some required a little bit more training. And I think this conference had given them the opportunity to present their abstracts, sometimes at first just in a poster format, but then moving up to giving actual platform talks. And I think you were able to see some students who started out kind of rough and not comfortable speaking, and by the time they had come to AAI a few times and having a talk at the end, they now had a very strong, polished talk. And those students then could carry those skills forward. They used that type of arena to be stronger in a public environment. My former students have now gone on to be very active in industry, very active in academia, very active in various companies. And I think part of that was being able to come to these meetings and meet and make contacts as well as get good at communicating their science. There was a few aha moments. One was it's kind of interesting. I had a lot of different jobs over the summers. And then one particular summer, I was invited to work at the University of Minnesota Medical School to work on protein biochemistry. And the project itself was not entirely intuitively obvious to a young student who didn't know all the biology associated with it. But what happened was I began working on different technologies that are designed to understand how does an enzyme work, how do we knock out its catalytic features, how do we study the enzyme as a protein in general. And I just remember starting to generate the data and do the different protein analysis and blots, and I realized suddenly that this was the type of work I could do for 20 hours a day if I wanted to. It was just really fun to look at and analyze data. A little bit further on in immunology was when I was in a laboratory with my mentor, Dr. Larry Pease, where we were working on trying to look at what was the nature of CD8 Tcell responses against viruses. And the interesting finding was we realized that a large number of the CD8 T cells were highly specific for one particular virus target. And this was at the time very interesting because we thought that it was a very diverse T cell response. But in this particular case, they're highly focused. And when we first saw that result, when you looked at the different flow cytometry plots and the data again, there was that moment where you were excited to see something truly changing the way you thought about how the biology was. And since then, this happens every few years. You will work a lot of maybe a year or two in a row, and suddenly you'll have that one set of data that really sets the stage for a new line of investigation that, because it was sort of what you thought you weren't sure what you were going to see, but then you had that one experiment that really showed a new direction, and suddenly papers after papers come out just from one particular set of data. And I think those are the aha moments that they don't only happen once, they kind of happen as you go through your career, and you hope to see the students in your lab have those moments with you. The most important thing about immunology is that it encompasses virtually all of the very important features of being human. I think to a certain degree, obviously, one can make an argument that you cannot live with, for example, the central nervous system because you would not be moving. But the idea that you are protecting yourself from a sea of pathogens daily as you encompass this, as you breathe it, as you eat it, the fact that you have something in place to take care of these things constantly all the time is amazing to me. The fact that you can protect your body in all these different ways. The other thing I find immunology being incredibly important for is it's getting more difficult to find a disease that isn't affected by immunology. And that includes a lot of neurologic diseases that for example, people maybe did not associate with T-cell immunology. Multiple sclerosis was the first bona fide immune-mediated neurologic disease, but as time goes on, we know that immunology is affecting Parkinson's, it's affecting stroke, it's affecting epilepsy, and these are broad areas of neurology that have been virtually kind of historically not really considering a component of inflammation in immunology. And so I think that's where immunology is really an important play, is that unlike the central nervous system, we can change a lot of what's blood-derived and what is immunological. And so in the future, if you could alter these immune responses to neurologic diseases, for example, this would be a good opportunity to reduce some of the pathology associated with these diseases. I kind of come back because it's a good way to get a pulse on the entire field. Obviously, everyone I was trained under is an AAI member, and so it's part of our lineage to come back and meet the people that you were a graduate student with, or that you were postdocs with, that you met in other study sections and in the field in general. And it's interesting to come back and see how all these projects that were individually done over the years, how they've taken one step further each year. It's a good opportunity to make contacts. You find people who, inevitably you always run into someone new that you didn't know before who has an area of biology that's interesting and collaborative with what you were doing. And so what keeps me coming back is partly a family atmosphere. I know a lot of the people here and many of the people I've known over the years are also coming back and are successful in their own arenas. So that's part of it, but the other aspect is it's a good way to see the whole pulse of the field, and finally it's good to find collaborations.